paralleling that push of the Clinton administration, Rockefeller was also funding this guy who was at Harvard, psychiatrist by the name of Dr. John Mack. And he was funding him, and he was funding all these other UFO researchers, but really funding John Mack. So John Mack...
The guy you were talking about, right?
Yeah, so John Mack, with the funding of Lawrence Rockefeller, flew down to Africa with a camera crew and documented, I think it was roughly 66 out of the 100 school children that were on the field that day, in broad daylight. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
1994. I think it was September 1994. And I find the testimony of the children so compelling.
Yes.
Because it's one after the other. And they're all talking about these big, big black almond-shaped eyes and the telepathy.
That was the thing.
And it was also, you know, as I listened to the testimony of these children, I was so moved by it. All these kids saying the same thing. Of course, some of them saw the craft over here, some of them saw it over there, and they saw red lights and blue lights and green lights, all metallic, bright, shiny object. And it was almost like you got the impression that whatever it was they were looking at was in between dimensions, because it could appear here and appear over there. This is one thing that I didn't share. It's certainly not in the movie, but according to the children, these beings that were roughly the size of them were as curious about the children as the children were of them, and they were mimicking the children's behavior on the playground. They were almost like, because the children would get to these, in Africa, in Zimbabwe, I was told that if the grasses and stuff weren't maintained and mowed, there were dangerous snakes and spiders
Yes.
and things of that nature out there. So the children were not allowed to go beyond these big telephone poles that were defined the perimeter of the playground. But being children, they would go all the way out to these poles, and they would skip and dance on them, knowing that if they went 2 inches to the right, they would be out of bounds, which they weren't allowed to do. They'd get in trouble for. So they would skip along these poles, and the children told me as adults that these little creatures were mimicking their skipping behavior in a very benign fashion.
Didn't you say something about they were like jumping on the logs with them too? And
skipping along. They were kind of floating along the logs, according to the children, very happily and non-threatening, but they were as curious of the children as the children were of them, according to the eyewitness witness testimony. And it was the preponderance of first-hand eyewitness testimony. I mean, you think about 100 school children in broad daylight, all seeing something completely inexplicable. There's no terrestrial explanation to what those children saw.
I'm trying to remember, did the kids, because you interspliced this with Dr. John Mack's interviews from
Yes.
back then when they were all children, and then you brought some of these now adults back to discuss it, and you did it on camera.
Yes.
At the school. I remember in the documentary the adults described telepathy.
Yes.
I don't know if the kids used
Yes.
the word, but did they describe how the aliens were communicating with them in their mind?
Yes. Yes, they did. The children did, yes. That they would see imagery, that they were communicating telepathically with these children.
And what were they saying to the children?
They were depicting destruction of the planet. Technology was going to be our downfall.
That was amazing. That the
things
kids
of
were
that
saying
nature, and all these children were saying. Now, not every child had the telepathic communication, but the ones that came face to face.
How
Like
many?
you look at Selma. A good percentage. Honestly, I don't know, because I didn't talk to all those, but a lot of them. So, you have Dr. John Mack. He had, I think, 66 children on camera, both in the playground and sat down interviews inside. And they all saw either the craft or the beings at a distance. And there were a handful, because there were different groups of kids in different locations. Everyone froze. I mean, they were just like, what the hell are we looking at here? And some of them had face-to-face contact, like Selma, for instance. And I said to Selma and Liesel, well, how close were you to this creature?
Yeah.
She said, about a meter. Well, a meter is like 3 feet, right? So that's like arm's length.
And it was the same size as them, you said.
Same size as them, yeah.
Which is how these are often described at all these. They're childlike size.
Really funny because they interview this one kid, and it's on the archival footage, and the person asking, so how exactly how big was this bean or whatever you call it? And the kid goes, about my size. About my size. It was so cute. Oh my gosh. And they talked about it so matter-of-factly, you know. And there's no bias with children like at that level, you know. They're not saying like we saw aliens from Alpha Centauri, or you know, it's like here's what we saw. We all saw it, and you know, and the other thing is that they felt that the adults had let them down. Well, of course, the adults didn't have an explanation for what had happened. The school teacher, then school teacher, now she's the headmistress, Judy Bates, actually had her own experience with this thing, and she kept it quiet because she was in fear for her career, her reputation. So she felt terrible. I actually went to Africa and I met with her, and she apologized. I said, anything you'd like to say to the children? She's like, I'd like to apologize. I was dealing with my own kind of experience. And she was concerned about her reputation and her career and her future, and decided to just keep that quiet for 20 whatever plus years.
And what year did you visit there again? Like 2018?
I went there in like 2017, 2018, something like that. Yeah.
So here's a little clip from I think this was Selma, because I don't remember all their names, but not her right there. She's about to come on.
This alleged encounter caught the attention of Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack.
Seemed that he was looking at all of us.
Is that her?
Yep. So that's Liesl.
Liesl.
She had face-to-face telepathic communication.
Felt scared?
So did Selma.
What was scary about it?
All right, so she said I felt scared.
Well, felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before. And I saw this person, and it had big eyes. That's all I saw about it.
Yeah.
Big
That's
eyes.
Emma. She lives in Australia now.
Quite a long top. With a big head and eyes that are bigger than ours.
How much bigger than ours?
4 or 5 times the size.
4 or 5 times the size of ours.
So then I was looking at him, right?
Yeah.
Then he was looking at me back. I couldn't just keep on looking at him, so I had to stop and I looked sideways. But I was looking straight into his eyes. Well,
And none of
he
them
never
ran.
said anything. It's just that
Frozen
the
in their
face
tracks.
has the eyes.
Maybe they're trying to communicate with us, show us something which we don't know about.
I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world and we mustn't get too technologed. We don't.
Okay, so that's I want to leave it right there,
Yeah.
because here's a very, I think, central question around some of these UFO sightings, and we're skipping around a little bit today. We're going to get to a moment of contact very soon. I do want to take it there deliberately,
problem,
but I want to stay with this for a second.
Yeah.
In a lot of the UFO cases that maybe we'll get to later again in the phenomenon, there's the mention that these UFOs will appear at nuclear testing sites or nuclear bases where they have the actual weapons.
Yes.
And there's even reports that the weapons, a lot of reports where the weapons suddenly inexplicably become disabled when these things have appeared. And we've had military guys that you had in your documentary, even old guys who, this was years ago, testify about this. There's been a ton of sightings in Russia that are of the same thing. And they keep showing up very often, obviously not in the case of the Zimbabwe one, but they show up at the places that house the weapons that, at least since World War II, have been the most dangerous potential warning sign of us having the end of humanity if we started to hit that button. And you kind of wonder when they come and talk to these kids playfully in a way. And I can't put myself in their shoes. Who knows where the fuck they're from, or, you know, what kind of time or theory of relativity they've figured out, which is obviously far beyond us. But it almost seems like they're watching us like a god a little bit, if this is the case, to make sure we don't destroy ourselves. And then they come to innocent little children, playfully talk with them in a telepathic way, where these kids, they're fucking 8 years old, 7 years old, and they're talking about how this is in 1994, before the internet, how we're destroying the planet and doing all this shit to it, and that's the warning they give. It's almost like that was a way for them to go communicate to the everyman through the eyes of an innocent child the things that they're trying to say by saying, don't hit that fucking button, idiot, when they're standing at these nuclear bases or flying over these nuclear bases.
So I interviewed a number of eyewitnesses regarding that aspect of the phenomenon, and that is they're seen over these, particularly during the Cold War, the height of the Cold War. They are witnessed in Russia and all scattered across the United States. And this launch control officer, Robert Salas, I'll never forget this. I think I included this in the film Out of the Blue I did. He said, because he was so funny. It was like I could tell why he was a launch control officer, because he had these nerves of steel. He was just super calm, just measured, calm, collected, not the kind of guy that would, And he goes, well, James, the message I got when they shut our nukes off, it's almost like they were taking matches out of the hands of a baby. That's what he said to me. I was like, wow, I think about that all the time. It's like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be playing with these.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the message he got. So it was really funny, because that aspect of the phenomenon is just crazy, right? Because if these things are coming over our most guarded areas and shutting down our nukes, shutting them off, turning them on in some instances, but just to kind of let them know that they had full control. Wow, that's kind of intense. That's an issue of national security.
Yeah.
And if it ain't, I don't know what is. I'd known about this, but I wasn't going to include it in the phenomenon. I just didn't want to go down that rat hole.
Why did you then?
Well, because when I got an interview with former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, we had an amazing interview. He was the one that started that ATIP program that ultimately ended up at ATIP, that secret Pentagon UFO program.
Didn't that interview almost not happen or something?
Yes.
Were you telling me that?
Yes.
What was that story?
Well, I'll tell you that in a second, because that's pretty damn funny. That's pretty funny. Well, I don't know, for some reason during the sit-down interview, and that was a big moment for me in my career. I have George Knapp to thank for that. I said, we had a quick walk and talk, and he had a very limited amount of time with me. I mean, it was like, I'm going to be from here to here, and then I'm out. And he had security and all this stuff, and he was an important guy. And I said, hey, do you mind if I get a quick walk and talk? He's like, okay, I think I got about a minute and a half. I was like, all right. So we're walking down this hallway. I told Dave, my DP, I said, don't worry about lighting and everything. We just got to get this, handheld, just walk and talk. We got to, better something than nothing. So I'm walking. I'm like, well, I might as well ask them, a question. Didn't have any professional audio gear or anything, but I said, what was one of the more astonishing aspects of the phenomenon that you uncovered during this Pentagon UFO program? And without even pausing, he said, the fact that they're flying over our nuclear installations and shutting them off. I thought, oh my God, did the former Senate Majority Leader just say that on camera to me? Wow, that's incredible. And that was something I just forgot to ask him. I didn't think about asking him that question during our interview.
Why do you think he did it?
Did the interview?
Yeah. I mean, he had been around forever.
I know. It's such a risk for someone's reputation. He did that program all the way through the tail end of the Bush presidency, all the way through Obama's presidency, and then into Donald Trump's presidency before it came out. Wow. So that program was secret. And I wonder if Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo and a handful of others behind the scene hadn't opted to do what they did, find a loophole, retire, step down. Lou left in protest of the excessive secrecy.
What was his job title?
Lou Elizondo, he ran the UFO desk. He ran that program, the ATIP. And, there's been controversy around Lou. I'm like, Lou was exactly who he says he was, and he did exactly what he said he did. I mean, I spoke to Senator Harry Reid about it. And I actually, was there when Lou got the letter from Senator Harry Reid confirming all the things. Lou was head of that program. Lou stepped down in protest of excessive secrecy. They found a loophole, and Christopher Mellon walked that evidence out of the Pentagon. The Go Fast, the Tic Tac videos.
Is that David Fravors?
Yeah, it was part of the Nimitz 2004. Nimitz 200 miles off the coast of San Diego, 2004. It was David Fravor, and they were David Fravor, his Wizzo, I guess, was the guy in the back seat, and then another pilot and his Wizzo. So yeah, I think 4 pilots all in all. But in any case, he walked those tapes out on the front page of the New York Times. It's not because people go, why are we experiencing more government transparency? Because a handful of insiders decided that there's too much secrecy around this. There's something truly inexplicably going on. There's very compelling evidence, and the public has a right to know. So that's why, and now they can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? The intelligence people have been like, even Senator Reid said this to me on camera. He goes, when they found out I wanted to do a UFO program, even though it was hidden from the public, they were just putting the brakes on. No, we can't do this. No. He got so much resistance, and he fought back, and he made it happen. But it was still in secret. Obama didn't know about it. Bush didn't know about it. And Trump didn't know about it.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, in some ways, like, I know there's all kinds of, like, power broking behind the scenes in D.C. Your position, like the Democratic leader of the Senate, like, you've been there a long time. You were there before the president was there and everything. So there's, in some ways I could see that, but still, to have someone that high profile talk about it is wild. And if I played, like, cynic devil's advocate for a second, if this were if these things were the beginnings of all these crazy secrets that they possess, that now they're admitting like they do have secrets to the public, I wonder if there's almost something way bigger that could very well have to do with aliens that they're trying to divert attention away from by throwing us things and acting like, oh, wow, yeah, no, this happened. Like, look at this fucking secret from 1955 we had. Yeah, we recovered that. And people are like, holy shit. But they'd really be going, oh, my God. Like, if they saw the real stuff that maybe they're not going to release. Like, I do wonder about that.
Well, they definitely
distraction.
Have. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, I know that, but I'm saying, like, they've talked about the icebergs there.
Yeah.
What about the other iceberg over there? The one that, like, the Titanic hit? Like, what if that's a way bigger iceberg and they're, like, not trying to draw attention to it? They're trying to divert attention by get carrot in a stick in it to all of us.
Well, so this is something that I can give an example of obfuscation, okay, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. Nothing I'm stating is... Well, the stories I'll tell you are factual in the sense that they're out there and they're pretty credible. I was investigating a landing case from 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico, from a police officer by the name of Lonnie Zamora, who was on duty in a hot pursuit. Socorro, New Mexico, 1964, Lonnie Zamora. Your audience can look it up. And in the process of that investigation, it was a close encounter of the third kind. Now, close encounter of the third kind, and this was in the peak of Project Blue Book, 5 years before it got shut down.
Can you tell people what Project Blue Book is?
Yes. So I'll go to. So Project Blue Book was Air Force investigations of UFOs from 47 to 1969 when it was terminated. It started off as Project Sign. The conclusions of Sign were that we were being visited. That was scrapped. It went to Grudge, and then it went to Project Blue Book. But anyway, it was spanned from 47 to 69. In that investigation, during the investigations, there was a guy named Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And Allen Hynek classified UFOs into 3 categories. 1, close encounter of the first kind, someone sees a UFO. Close encounter of the second kind, they see the UFO, and somehow the UFO interacts with the environment, whether it leaves burn marks on the ground or someone's face or picked up on radar, photographed. It interacts with the environment somehow. It's there. Close encounter of the third kind is when, and this is like the Air Force's own files, it's not coming from me, is when there are reports of entities, beings associated with the UFO. So you have a UFO on the ground and you've got beings standing next to it. That was a case in 1964 with police officer Lonnie Zamora that I was investigating.
In the phenomena.
In the phenomena.
Yep.
Very good case. It was a turning point for one of the debunkers, the loudest debunker, Dr. Hynek, who did a complete 180. And that was one of the cases apparently that really swayed him because he found the credibility of the police officers so high. And there was physical evidence on the ground. And there were other people that saw the UFO. And he got within 35, 40 feet of a landed egg-shaped object. And you wonder when the Tic Tacs were invented. I don't know what year they were. Were the Tic Tacs around in 64? Would Lonnie have described it as a Tic Tac?
What the Nimitz saw, like that stuff.
It was a white egg shape. He called it a white egg-shaped craft with landing gear.
And that's what he saw with the people, right there.
Yeah, there were two beings, in white-fitting, like, coverall suits. And they looked diminutive, like small, childlike is the way he described them.
I'll put that picture in the corner of the screen so people can see.
Yeah, and he had direct eye contact with it. So anyway, I'm investigating this case, and I'm really sticking my teeth into it. I mean, I went to the National Archives. I found never before seen archival stuff and drawings of the landing sites and photographs, and I'm finding archival footage. I befriended Lonnie Zamora's wife, Mary. I became friends with her. I got her on camera for the first time ever.
Because he's dead now.
He's dead. Unfortunately, I missed him by a few years. Ugh. That's a whole nother story. Damn it. Oh, there's so many things I wanted to ask him about.
Was he killed before you could
Oh, my
get to
gosh.
him?
Well, I don't want to go too far down this case, but it's a really good case, and there's physical evidence to this case, and more than just landing imprints and footprints of the creatures and all this other stuff. But I'm investigating this case, and I'm doing so over about a 5-year span. I'm going back and forth to Socorro. Like I said, I'm getting to know his wife. I got to know his daughter, Diane, and his son, Michael, and, all his friends, people that he worked with. Got them all on camera. Some of them didn't end up in the film. God, I don't know why that happens. It just does. You think you get all this amazing stuff, but there's only so much.
Yeah, I don't know how you fit it all in.
How are you going to squeeze it all into? It's like one case among many other cases.
You know what? Real quick, just side note. Have you ever seen the Frontline interview file? I don't know if that's what they're called, but like the PBS Frontline interview files where they play the full interviews they had as separate content?
That's a brilliant thing to do.
You should do that.
I am sitting on terabyte upon terabyte of interviews.
Yeah.
I probably have the biggest collection of UFO interviews on the planet.
Well, you should do that.
Because I've been doing this for 30 years, like insane, right? I have so many. And
James, we're going to do that.
I know. Dude, I have so many. Thing is, I don't have the bandwidth to do all this. But what I did do.
Well, here you go. There's your bandwidth.
What I did do 2 years ago, right after I finished the phenomenon, I thought I got to get all my my interviews and all my other hard drives and old hard drives, and I got to put them all in one big fat drive. So I got two, I think 30, 35 terabyte drives, maybe 48 terabyte drives. I got a couple of them, and I put everything on them. Every film I've ever made, every interview, they're all there. So, and I got 3 back. I got one, one in Vermont, one in California, one in a storage,
Don't tell people where this shit is. You out of your mind? Bustamante is going and finding it right now.
But no, it's a very good idea. I should definitely do that. But let me get back to this, because this is interesting.
Please.
This is really interesting. I come across, and this is when I'm investigating the landing case, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I come across some articles by a woman named Coral Lorenzen at the UFO Chronicle or UFO Post she did during the 50s and 60s. She was a very prominent researcher, Coral Lorenzen. I'm trying to think anyway, I'm reading this article because, quite honestly, I thought it had something to do with the landing at Socorro with the officer Lonnie Zamora. And one of the aspects, the Air Force, and they were on the scene within 1 hour, Army and Air Force, they did not want Lonnie to talk about the fact that he saw these creatures. Downplay that. Don't talk about that. It's one thing to see an unidentified craft. It's an entirely different story when you're looking at some aliens, right?
Yes.
Or something that appears to be alien. Like, that's much more difficult to explain than an egg, okay?
Everybody see the leprechaun, say yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they were really getting Lonnie to downplay that. So it was very difficult for me, and Lonnie's dead, to find, the aspects of that encounter of the creatures. But I found it. The media got there just before the military arrived, Holder, his name was Richard Holder, and he was from White Sands. And he got there, and I actually talked to his kids. He unfortunately deceased, and they didn't make it in the film either, dang it. But they told me that the father took plaster casts of the aliens' footprints in the ground and the landing prints of the craft, and they said it was in the middle, it was an arroyo in the middle of the desert, and it was really heavy. Like there were no trucks, there were no tire tracks leading up to this site. So whatever it was came down and landed out of nowhere and left. And there were a couple of footprints exactly where Lonnie Zamora, the police officer, saw these creatures, and they were weird footprints. They were small. They were like...
Yeah, you had this in the film, the footprints,
totally,
right?
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm investigating this, and I'll get to this other aspect in a second, because this is pretty amazing. So I read this article by Carl Lorenzen, the UFO Bulletin, and talking about a landing, and I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to get some more details on Socorro. And it's talking about a landing at Holloman Air Force Base, a landing that was also a close encounter of the third kind. Mm-hmm. However, this one might have been filmed by the military at White Sands. Excuse me. Now, Holloman is a stone's throw from Socorro. I mean, it's like, as the crow flies, I don't know, a few minutes, 30 miles. I mean, it's close. Okay. Well, I'm absolutely convinced that the Socorro case happened, but now I'm suddenly starting to hear about a landing at Holloman. I don't exactly have a date. I think it might have been like right around the same time, but I don't have a date, which would have been around 64. And I'm finding this reports from Carl Lorenzen from that time in 1964 pretty damn credible. I'm like, So then I find another article, and that leads me to it was testimony from people that were at the base at the time talking about a UFO, a flying saucer landing, and the occupants getting out. Now, I know this sounds extremely like, what's the word I'm looking, outlandish, untrue, too fantastic, whatever. I get it. But I'm leading slowly. Then I find a film called UFOs Past, Present, and Future. And it was done by two guys, Emenager and Alan Sandler, in 1974. They probably started shooting in 72, something like that, shooting. Now, these guys had, you can go out and watch the film, it's on YouTube. These guys had unprecedented access, military access, during their production.
How'd they get it?
They got it from a guy named Colonel Coleman at the Pentagon, but I won't go too far down that, but they did. Okay. They just did. And in this production, they're working with Hynek. They're working with, and Hynek was with Project Blue Book, the United States Air Force, but he's since left the Air Force. It was 72, something like that. He's working with Quintanilla, who ran Blue Book. They're working with Robert Friend, who was also part of Project Blue Book. They're working with this guy, William T. Coleman, who is currently at the Pentagon. He was public liaison officer for the Pentagon, and they were working with him at the time. Like, how did these guys get this level of cooperation in 1972? Wow. And I could tell every aspect of this production was carefully crafted. Every word in this film was carefully crafted because they kind of had to, because they were working with the military. Well, in this film, they talk about an incident at Holloman Air Force Base that maybe happened or could happen in the future, but it might have already happened.
Could happen in the future.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, So I get in touch. I watch the movie, and I'm like, God, everything else is so factual. All the cases are so factual. Like, everything is like, they cover Socorro. They cover all these other cases that I've covered that I'm very familiar with. I'm like, oh, man, there's something going on about this. So I contact Emenager, and I contact Alan Sandler, the guys that made the film. Emenager is super willing to go on the record and talk to me on camera, and he's super excited. He's like, yeah, they had film footage of that landing at Holloman. I said, what? Yes, they have film footage of a landing at Holloman. We almost got our hands on it. That's why we made the movie about an incident that may have happened already, or maybe it's something that's going to happen in the near future. But isn't that interesting? Okay, so so Emenager is convinced that, and the relevance of this story will come out in a minute, I promise.
No, this is good. Keep going.
So Emmenegger's convinced that this film footage of a UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base and the occupants getting out and interacting with the base commanders exists. I know that sounds nuts. Believe me, I know that. But one of the producers of the film is convinced it happened. And I said, well, why are you so convinced? He said, because the guy at Paul Shartle, who was at Norton Air Force Base, audio video department. I have a clip of him. I could show it, get it to you. Paul Shartle had the footage at Norton Air Force Base, and he was going to give it to us. And somehow the higher-ups got involved, and the footage vanished. I said, well, so then I'm going to Alan, and I'm going, Alan, what's this about this footage, and why is it not in your movie? Like, what happened? He goes, oh, yeah, I was shown that footage. I said, well, hold on a second. I'm driving my car, and I'm on the phone with him. Excuse me. And I said, excuse me, hold on a second. What? He goes, yeah, no, I was shown that Paul Shartle showed me the footage. Well, Emmenegger, your partner who you produced this movie with, he doesn't know that. Well, I was kind of told,
Well, he was told what?
I'll tell you what happened.
Okay.
So, and this is all paralleling the Socorro. I was
Zamora.
only found out about this really because of the Socorro case that I was investigating. And I suddenly,
Which you were looking at because of Zamora.
because of Lonnie Zamora,
Right,
and it was
okay.
proximity to that, and the time frame and proximity to the base in Socorro is very close. Holloman, White Sands, blah blah blah. Now they were testing missile sites, and they were doing all kinds of activity that might have been of interest at White Sands. I don't know how far away it is from Trinity site. Probably not that. Not that far. New Mexico was a hot spot.
I'm going to put, by the way, just for people out there, I'm going to put a very, not like a Google Earth one, but a very basic map with like a pinpoint of these places
Perfect.
you're talking about in the corner so people can see for the visual.
Perfect idea. So I'm in a car. I'm talking to Alan, and he tells me out of the blue that he saw, and this is the guy that produced UFOs Past, Present, and Future. He's got Jacques Vallée in the movie. He's got all these characters that were all part of the government. I mean, like, something was up. I pulled the car over, and I did what I always do when I want to really absorb a story. And that is I close my eyes. And the reason why is because I want the words to create the imagery. I want to know exactly every detail of what he saw. So I pulled the car over the side of the road, stopped, turned the engine off, had the speaker, I had my phone on speaker, and I said, Alan, tell me exactly what you saw. So he said, okay. There were 3 discs that were escorted by a military jet, roughly 10, he wasn't sure of the altitude, 10, 12,000 feet. It was guesstimation. And this is what the film footage saw that he claims to have seen, that Paul Shartle at Norton Air Force Base in California on camera admitted that he had it in his possession. He'd seen it, and that it was not of Earth origin, in Paul Shartle's opinion. Emmenegger's opinion as well, but Emmenegger never saw it. Alan Sandler did see it. He doesn't know what it was. He think it could have been some kind of potentially a staged event, whatever. So 3 discs flying in, okay? Mm-hmm. 2 of them peel away, gets over the base, and one of them wobbles to the ground, and he said it was like a leaf, like floating down from the sky. The way he said it was like, it looked like it was in trouble. Well, any credible witnesses you ever talk to about a flying saucer, when they're hovering, they're unstable. They all the witnesses will tell you that it was like a ship floating on a rough sea almost they do this kind of movement. I've seen footage of a UFO one time that did exactly that. And it looks like it's oscillating. It's got a weight. I don't know. It's not stable. So anyway, he says it wobbles down to the ground like it was in trouble. But I don't think Alan knew that's how they hover, apparently. So it comes down to the ground, and he goes, James, I said, well, hold on a second. Was the camera on sticks? Was it handheld? Was it black and white? Was it color? Like what because if it was on sticks, then they were anticipating it coming. So,
are you also listening for where, it feels like when you do this, because you want such detail, are you trying to listen to poke holes on where he's not going to be very sure about something and you can kind of pick up on it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want every I did that, I did that once with Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14, sixth man to walk on the moon because I wanted to know what it was like to walk on the moon. Give me every detail, down to the macrometeorites pelting the skin of the craft they were sitting on the surface of the moon. But that's another story. So anyway, he says it lands, and he said, James, just like in a sci-fi movie, this seamless door opens, and out come these beings that had very large noses, slits for mouths, and their eyes were like almost like a vertical slit, like a cat eye, like very, very big. And they had, I'm not saying, I need to make this abundantly clear to your audience. I'm not saying what's true or what's not true, or if it happened or if it's alien or whatever it is. I'm just telling you what I was told by people who saw it, claimed to have seen it. And that they came out and they met with the base commanders, and then they either got into a Jeep or were about to get into a Jeep or do something, and then the film footage just cuts. So I was like, what happened? Why didn't you guys get to use that footage? He goes, well, I think it was one of our flying saucers. Alan was like, it was definitely one of our flying saucers. I was like, so you think that we have flying saucer technology in our possession? He goes, yeah, but it wasn't very good because it couldn't hover very well. It looked like it was in trouble. I said,
one of ours.
That's what he was saying.
He's talking about. He's mentioning the seeing the creature here too.
Yeah. So here's what his thoughts were. His thoughts were that it was a real flying saucer that was in our possession, which would indicate that we had that technology in 1972, which I think is bullshit.
Okay.
And that the beings were, made up, dressed up, whatever. He's like, I can't say for sure. So I'm hammering. So I really stuck my teeth into it. Now, the point of this is that there is very credible testimony claims that a UFO landed at Holloman Air Force Base. There were a number of witnesses that were on the record. Corral Lorenzo documented this whole thing in the UFO Bulletin. Then there was a film made roughly 8 years later that was going to possibly include that footage. Now, Paul Shartle, who showed the footage to Alan Sandler, had men in dark suits show up from wherever and say, don't ever talk. What happened here? This was not supposed to have happened, and took the footage away and debriefed him, and that was the end of that.
Start looking at the lap, please.
Yeah,
I stay right here. Your name is John Smith.
So Alan didn't tell Emenager for 40, whatever it was, years.
Wow.
Yeah. So that whole aspect of it came out. So now the point of the story is this, okay? Now, if you go online, you hear about secret meetings with President Eisenhower and aliens at a base and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. You hear all this shit. You're like, there's no substance to that story at all. In fact, there's lots of substance to the story I just told you guys. There is incredibly compelling testimony that that event happened and that there's film footage of that event. Now, what exactly it was it first contact? Was it a staged event? Was it our technology? Was it a flying? I don't know. But that story probably happened, okay? Some aspect of it. The meeting with the aliens and the treaties and all this stuff with President Eisenhower, was that just thrown in there to throw everybody off? In my opinion, absolutely yes. Is there substance to the story I just shared with you? Absolutely yes. But now suddenly the waters have been muddied. What a can of worms. Who the hell wants to look into that case of our president of the United States making contact and signing treaties with aliens? So it's like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to steer clear of that, So just giving you one example of obfuscation, it's a perfect thing to do. I mean, what a great... Look, everyone's like, well, if UFOs were real, they'd land on the White House lawn. Well, they almost did in 1952, 2 consecutive weekends in July, okay? They buzzed the Capitol, they buzzed the White House. Yeah.
And we're going to bookmark that.
Yeah, very compelling. In fact, we have testimony, never before seen eyewitness testimony of the man who was in the radar room listening to the voices of the military jet pilot that was flying at 500 miles an hour through the darkness, the complete pitch black sky, and is surrounded by UFOs over the Capitol in 1952 in July.
Holy shit.
The man that was in the radar room. It's It's phenomenal testimony. Phenomenal. Like he's suddenly surrounded by these little UFOs are surrounding him. What do I do? And they're looking, they could see it on the radar. There's his plane and there's these UFOs all around him. What do I do? You know, they were given the orders to shoot. That's a whole other thing that we can talk about later. But
all right, you know what? Fuck a bookmark on this. Hold on a minute. So when you say something like that and you're like, oh yeah, no, 100%, there were 1952, there were UFOs in DC and whatever, and then people hear something about Eisenhower, I'm just thinking of like all the most cynical people out there who are like, what the fuck am I even listening to right now? Let's start with the 52 thing.
yes.
You're saying that we had witnesses on the ground in DC. Did you say they were all government related, or were there also civilians? Let's start.
Well, there were civilians too, but they were government related, like pilots and radar operators and Al Chop. I think he was like public relations between UFO. You have to look him up, Al Chop. But Al Chop was in the radar room in 1952 when they scrambled military jets that were doing roughly 500 miles an hour through the pitch black.
But these UFOs allegedly do like 12,000 miles an hour or something.
Well, my point is this. The pilot was terrified. He was flying in pitch black, 500 miles an hour over the Capitol.
And how many had they sighted again? You said so much in there. I want to make sure we're following.
5 to 12 UFOs. I don't know how
big
many.
We talking?
They were like, you know, remember they described the Tic Tac?
Yeah.
They were in that ballpark size, and they were surrounding his craft, flying at 500 miles an hour. They were just, I mean, they were, you know, appear over here, appear over there. And at first, there was 2 consecutive weekends in July of 1952. Anyone can Google it. And at first, these UFOs would appear, they'd scramble the jets, and then as soon as the jets got anywhere near them, they were gone. They're just poof, gone. But at one point, the military jet, the pilot, went after him, and they surrounded his plane. And Al Chop was in the room, and we have testimony on camera for the first time ever, because it was part of an archive. This guy went around with a camera and documented all these historical cases. Thank God. But he never did anything. He never did anything with it. Tom Julian and Project Archive, and I had read about this Project Archive, and I was like, oh my God, footage of Al Chop, footage of this other person. This is unheard of. Nobody's got any of this stuff. And reached out to him, and he's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. That's just some weird rumor on the internet. I don't have any of that stuff. And I was like, that's kind of weird. So then I was like, well, I'm working with Jacques Vallée. And he's like, you're working with Jacques Vallée?
I have the footage.
I have the footage. He goes, yeah, I swear to God.
As a matter of fact,
he goes,
I do.
Yeah, I was like, so can you get me dinner with Jacques Vallée? I said, I'll fly you out, and we'll get together. And so I did. I flew him out, Tom Julian. We had dinner, and he goes, I'll tell you what, I'll make a couple of people. I've got this big archive, but honestly, I've got these other plans for it. I need to actually remember that, because that guy's sitting on some crazy stuff. And I'll make a couple of select interviews from my catalog available to you. And one of them was Al Chop. And Al Chop describes, because the first time ever in the 1952 case over Washington, D.C., where you have a witness that was in the radar room and heard the pilot of the military jet, heard his voice, saw the radar, saw his jet and all the UFOs around it, and listened to the pilot's voice, who was terrified. What do I do? What do I do? They all just stood there in shock. They didn't know what to tell him to do.
We sure this wasn't like the Nazis and they just figured some shit out there in World War II and they were left over?
So here's the thing.
I got to throw it out there.
But here's my point again, because I'm going to get back to obfuscation, okay? So what happens? Very compelling testimony, military pilots, radar confirmation, visual confirmation, air-to-air radar, air-to-ground radar, ground-to-air radar, all this stuff. Really good case. Of course, none of that made it in Project Blue Book, but that's another story. So what happens? They got to do something. It's making headline news. Google it. Anyone can Google UFOs over Washington, 1952.
It's behind you.
Yeah.
On Wikipedia there.
Yeah. There we go. So they form the military. The CIA gets involved. They get a panel called the Robertson panel, intellectual heavyweights, think tank kind of thing. And they get together. I don't know what it was, a couple of weeks. We got to figure this problem out. This is a problem, right? We don't have control over airspace. We don't have explanation. They had a big, it was the biggest news conference with General John Samford since the ending of World War II. It was 1952. I don't know. They probably did that in July as well. You can look that one up. General John Samford gives a press testimony, addresses the nation in uniform, a general. Basically saying, hey, we got these objects. Could be weather phenomenon, or there are these things that we just can't explain coming from very credible people. And, it's a big statement from a military general in 1952. Yes. It's like, wow. So they got this problem. So the CIA gets involved. They get the Robertson panel, 1953, early on in 1953. And ultimately what they say is, well, lying to the public, so many testimonies. All right, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to adopt this policy of ridicule. And that's pretty much how this story has remained covered up for all these years, because ridicule. And it was a policy that was adopted in 1953 by the Robertson panel, and it stuck.
How very CIA of them.
Yeah, and so that's obfuscation. That's just throw in a bunch of ridicule and jokes and laughs. Like if you think about a military pilot being surrounded by UFOs, being, seen visually, picked up on radar, all that stuff, gun cam footage, there's nothing really funny about that.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. But you have the ridicule factor, so now you got this knee-jerk reaction. Anytime UFOs are mentioned, it's giggle factor, right? And that's a very effective campaign, and that started in 53. So I think that's another one of the reasons why they have changed the acronym from UFO to UAP, and now it's something else now, but it's Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. And there are other reasons,
Why?
too. Because it had baggage. The word UFO has baggage.
And you're saying they don't want it to have baggage?
They don't want it to have baggage.
You don't think that, the intelligence services don't want it to have baggage?
Well, it does have baggage, and they don't want that baggage. Yeah. That's definitely one of the reasons why. I promise you, that's one of the reasons why they changed it. I promise you. Also, it's slightly more accurate, but yeah.
There are so many things, I do want to say this, for the record.
Yeah.
There are so many things you're saying in these stories that I'm saying maybe every 15 seconds where I could stop you and ask a clarification question, but there's just too much, so that would ruin the podcast. So for people out there right now who are listening, but what about this? What about that? Fair. We'll have some more podcasts in the future, and we can go look at some holes or some stuff that we had to be another story for another day.
Yes.
And we will get to that at some point, in the future. I just want to make sure, people aren't just, some things aren't at least being questioned. But I'm still obviously clarifying on some major things I hear. And so on this last point about the ridicule, I mean, we know it's been covered in here in probably every podcast in America.
Little Green Men.
That the CIA essentially was very responsible for getting the term conspiracy theory into popular vocabulary after JFK and all that shit, because they wanted people to make everything a conspiracy. And mission accomplished, fellas, if you read the YouTube fucking comments out there, everyone thinks everything that ever happened is oh my God, it was this or that. And so it then, you get to cloak the 1% in the 99 of bullshit, and you can just always use the excuse of, well, this one isn't one of the 1%. And so they can do the same thing. And to hear you use that word ridicule for in 1952, 11 years before Kennedy got whacked, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting that they were on this topic of the most, I guess, no pun intended, otherworldly, talking about UFOs and stuff, they would want that to be oh yeah, that crazy asshole at the bar talking about this.
Yeah, and let me remind your audience, I'm very knowledgeable on what I'm knowledgeable about in terms of the cases and the historical perspective. I don't read about stuff and then report on it. I go after the first-hand eyewitness testimony, whether it's archival or whether they're still alive. I'm going after it, okay? I want the first-hand eyewitness testimony. That means the world to me. When I look into a specific case, I stick my teeth into it, and sometimes I'll stick my teeth into it for years. Not like I'm working on that case every day for 5 years, but on and off. The 1952 case, I wanted the testimony from Al Chop. Well, guess what? We found it. First time ever. I mean, that's because you have all the newspaper reportings. It's really interesting. You got, 1952, you got Project Blue Book going in full swing. Okay. Yeah. Did they interview the pilot who was surrounded?
No.
No, they did not. Oh, that's a
big hole.
That's a pretty damn big hole. But now we have testimony from a guy who was in the radar room describing the pilot's voice, like for the first time ever. They didn't interview the bloody pilot as part of their public Blue Book files.
Did you say that you knew that we know who he is? I can't remember that.
I do have his name. It's in the phenomenon. I've got a photograph of him with his airplane, and I believe his name beneath it. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but it was 1952. But he no statements from him. Hello.
He's dead now.
Of course, he's dead now. Al Chop's dead now, but
I keep thinking El Chapo every time he says that.
I know,
I'm waiting
El
for
Chop.
like a brick of Coke to come
Al
out.
Chop is doing an interview in the 80s, and he's old then, and he's smoking a cigarette during the interview.
The aliens were here, Chico.
But he was in the Pentagon. He was part of like public relations officer or liaison, press liaison, something like that. It's explained in the phenomenon, and I got his testimony in the phenomenon. So what I guess what I'm saying is, what I know is from my own firsthand. I go to on location.
Yes.
I'm investigating a case in Africa. Guess what? I go to Africa. I'm investigating a landing case in Socorro, New Mexico. I'm going to Socorro, New Mexico. I'm talking to the family. I'm going to the National Archives. I'm talking to the friends. I'm talking to coworkers. I'm really going to stick my teeth into this case because I don't believe something. Initially, when I hear something like a landing in Africa, bullshit, right? A UFO crash in Brazil, bullshit. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, period. I don't care what you think of Carl Sagan. He said that, and it's true, So in any case, all the stuff I'm sharing with your audience is stuff that I have personally looked into and gotten the testimony, either archival or met with the witnesses years later.
Or both.
And that's how I draw my own conclusions based on my personal research. I don't just like somebody who'll remain nameless, but he wrote a book on Socorro, and he got the symbol wrong that was on the side of the craft. And I called him up, and I was like, hey, well, how do you know? I said, because I went to the National Archives, and I got the document that was written in Dr. Hynek's own handwriting of the case. Then I talked to his wife, and I talked to the people around him, and, and that's how I know. He's like, I was like, have you been to Socorro? He's like, no. So you did a film, you wrote an entire book on this case, and you never even went to Socorro? Or the National Archives?
Probably a government plant.
He's not actually, but I bless his heart. He's a good guy. But how are you going to write a book on something if you haven't even been to the location? You haven't met with his, friends. His wife said to me, I'll never forget this. This is a guy who probably looked an alien straight in the eyes. A police officer. And this is not coming from me. This is coming from them. She said, I don't know what he saw, but he was never the same. And he admits that he made eye contact with this thing. Like it looked, because he was calling out. He was driving in his car because he saw the object coming down as if it was landing and it was in trouble. He didn't know what it was.
And then what was the aftermath? The thing, they got back in and they left, right?
Yeah, they got back in. So what happened was he was pursuing a speeder through the town of Socorro, New Mexico, April 24th, 1964, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And he's chasing after this car. It was a convertible. And he sees like something flickering in the sky off to his right. And he knows there's a dynamite shack. And he thought maybe some dynamite was going off. He was like, oh, shoot, this could be trouble. So he terminates the chase, and he drives up this hill to get a look. And he sees this object down. He gets up the hill, and he looks down in this little arroyo, and he sees this object sitting on the ground with a couple of these small little diminutive children-like people, is what he said. Looking at him, and he's got his window rolled down, and he's in his cop car. And he's probably a couple 100 feet, 300 feet, maybe a little more away from this object. He's got the window down, he's got his arm out the window, and he's looking out the window with the window down. What am I looking at? He's like, did a car crash and there's a couple of kids down there? So he's calling out. He's trying to call out, like, hey, you okay? You guys okay? Or is everything okay down there? And I know this because I read the article that was written right after it happened. I was going over it with Mary Zamora, his wife. And at which point, one of them looked him right in the eyes. And it really, like, I don't know. He didn't talk about any level of communication. If he had any communication, whether he did or didn't, I don't know. But he decides he's going to get a closer look at this thing. And in the process of doing so, he had to lose sight of the object for a moment. And I don't know how much you could see that. Like, let's just say, like, the UFO's here. He's on a dirt road here, okay? And he's looking that way. Mm-hmm. He's going to drive around to here. But in the process of driving from here to here, he loses contact with it just for a little bit. Well, then he gets here.
What do you mean he lost contact with it?
He couldn't see it visually for a second because he had to drive around a little hill and some bushes. And so he lost visual contact with the craft that was sitting on the ground with the two beings on the outside, okay? So he drives around, and now he's about 50 feet away from this thing, 60 feet, and he gets out of his car, and as he's getting out of the car to get a closer look, to walk towards this thing, he takes about 2 or 3 steps. He hears a clunk, and he used to be in the Army, and he said it sounded like that of a hatch of a tank. It was a very like, you know, and he didn't see them get in it. He didn't see the door close. That's what he heard. He got about 3 or 4 strides towards this egg-shaped object that had a red symbol on the side of it, which, again, obfuscation, okay? Well, this was actually one of the good things to have happened. When the first military officer arrived on the scene from the Army, his name was Richard T. Holder, and Richard Holder asked him if he wouldn't mind to say that the symbol was something different than what it was, and that the original symbol was never released to the general public. We found it in the archives in Dr. Hynek's own handwriting, and we had a description of it from the initial leaks that came out from the reporters that were on scene before the military got there, and it was an inverted V with 3 lines. So we weren't sure.
So what is that? Wait,
so it would be like an that? A, basically, like this.
With 3 lines through it?
Yeah, with 3 lines. So we had thought that maybe it was a line here, a line here, and a line here.
Like a pyramid.
Yeah, but as it turns out, we found out for the first time, and I took this guy, Ray Stanford, who wrote the book on it, Socorro Saucer in a Pentagon Pantry. You could look that up too. And Ray had been fighting the general public and the UFO community for 50 years when I took him to the National Archives, and he was reluctant to want to go with me. We're not going to find anything, nothing new. I said, well, if you have that attitude, we're not going to find anything. I've researched. I said, let's go to the National Archives. So we go there, and lo and behold, I won't bore your audience with how it came about, but we got the original Project Blue Book files from that case, and they were original, not photocopies, not microfilm, original copies, original drawings. And we found the letter from Dr. Julian, who investigated the case for the United States Air Force, of an inverted V and 3 lines. And what it was...
And you verified it was his handwriting?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That was right out of the Air Force files. It's an inverted V. I could draw it for your audience, but it's a slit here, one here, one here, one here, one here, and then one on top. Inverted V. I think I have, it's on the side of the craft in the film.
I'll do a shitty drawing and put it in the corner. That's a little bit dangerously close to the pyramid angle, though. I don't know.
What Richard Holder did was he got, actually it made sense. It made sense. He got Lonnie to lie and say that it was something else, like a U-shaped thing with a line here and an arrow.
Why?
Because if there were any copycat people that wanted to be in the limelight that said I saw the same thing, and yes, that was a symbol on the side, then they'd immediately be able to identify a hoaxer. And that's why they did. So it was smart.
Very smart.
Yeah, it was smart. So the truth about that never came out, but it, you know, and it's funny actually. Again, there it was in the documentary. I did. Oh, God, this is great. You know what? I'll talk about this right now because this is pretty intense. If you want to hear.
And you know what? I know I said this earlier, by the way. I just want you to be totally free-flowing. I had said once or twice early in the podcast, we're going to get to a moment of contact. Yeah. When I have a guest who's riding on some shit, we're riding on some shit and the plans are out the window. Keep going. We'll get there eventually.
I've never gone public with this because... Okay, so...
Oh, that's over. Let's go.
All right, let me give you guys the truncated version because it's kind of cool. I interviewed, and when I tell you I stick my teeth into a case, I stuck my teeth into a case. Let me take a sip of water. I talked to this guy, Christopher O'Brien. He's like, you're doing a you're going to cover the Socorro, New Mexico case. And I'm going to remind your audience, it's probably only going to be 8 to 10 minutes max in an hour and a half or an hour and 40-minute film. But I want to get it right. And I want to get every aspect of it right. So I flew to the East Coast. I met with this guy, Ray Stanford, who wrote the book, Squirrel Saucer at Pentagon Pantry, talking about the case. Apparently he was there within a week or so of it, saw the imprints, all this stuff. And in his book, Ray is talking about metal shavings from the landing gear of the craft that were recovered at the site. And Ray Stanford actually had those in his possession.
Now, are they metal or
Metal shavings.
were they metal appearing? Because it could be some element we don't know about.
So here's how he explained it to me. He said that, and I wasn't going to. In fact, I didn't even include this in the phenomenon. I didn't. So, and I had the rocks. Ray Stanford showed me the rocks. What happened? The landing gear came down. This thing was very, very heavy, and it broke this rock in half. It was a very hard rock, and it had a razor sharp edge. And the landing gear came down and hit that razor sharp edge of the freshly broken rock, and it peeled like a shaving. Very thin shaving, like almost like when they make drinks and they get the orange and they get the little thing out and make those.
Yeah.
He said it was like that. Metal shavings. And he got those. He dropped one of them in tall grass, never found it. The other one went to a lab at NASA, and they determined that they were magnesium isotopes not found in the U.S., not found in the world, something like this.
Is this what you had the Stanford doctor look at?
No.
Different thing?
Yes.
Because he was talking about isotopes. No?
Yes.
I'm not crazy?
Yeah, no, you're not crazy.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but that was a different thing.
Okay.
So this is Ray Stanford's story to me. And he's like, I took these in. He's like, I had him in my hands. And he took one he dropped in tall grass and never, I was like, you dropped it in tall grass and you never recovered? He goes, I looked up, I was on my hands and knees for hours. I don't know what happened. He was devastated. Talking about it like 40 years later, he was devastated.
So inconvenient. God damn.
So he takes the other one to a lab at NASA, and the initial findings are astronomical. Like, he's blown away, and he's like, oh my God. And then they're gone. And he was like, well, what do you mean they're gone? Well, we had to destroy him in the process of, So he was like, somebody stepped in, whatever. He said, my biggest regret was I trusted that, Anyway, so I heard about that, but I didn't cover it in the film. So I'm in the field. I'm in Socorro, New Mexico, and I'm interviewing his coworker. Now, his coworker worked out at the dump site. Now, Lonnie Zamora was a police officer, but because of the attention and the ridicule that he got, it was putting too much pressure on him, the town, his position as a police officer. Oh, you're the guy that, sees, oh, I was speeding. Oh, yeah, coming from the guy who sees little green men, like, that kind of thing. So he quit his job, and he quit being a police officer, and he got a job working at the dump site. And he wanted to be at the dump site because he was away from everybody else. He didn't have to see anybody else, talk to anybody else. And he worked with this guy who I have on camera. I have this, everything I'm about to tell you I have on camera. None of it's been released. So I'm doing the interview, and I want to get his description of the beans, because that was the aspect of the encounter that was so downplayed, because the Air Force wanted him to really, like, don't talk about the aliens that you saw. Don't talk about the beans. That's much more difficult to explain. Anyway, so this guy did not want to meet with me. Oh my gosh, we found him, and I took his wife Mary out there. We're like, got her involved, a call, and
you have a gun to her head?
Yeah, I got, and she didn't want to meet with either. The whole thing took a long time. This is a tight-knit
community. You get a lot of people to meet with you who didn't want to meet with you.
They did not want to get an outsider in this community. I'm telling you, it took time, and I had people that worked with me on the inside that were, anyway. Reluctantly, we managed to get him in his yard to go on camera. He's talking about, he said, James, he said, I worked with Lonnie, what was it, 28 years, 30 years, 35 years, a long time. Ever since he left the police force in 1964. And I think he retired in like 2003 or something like this. And he died in 2008. So he said, I never talked to him about the alien encounter. And at the end of 30 years or 28 years, whatever it was, whatever period he was at the dump site, Lonnie came to him when he was retiring. He said, you offered me an opportunity. I'm so grateful. I want to thank you so much for the employment and this. And I got to work here. And his buddy goes, yeah, I just would like one thing. And Lonnie knew immediately what he was talking about. He goes, okay, I'll tell you. So then he tells them, and of course he shared that with me.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.